Hello Varlets. Today I want to talk about the Psyker's talent tree update that arrived with this patch. In this video, we're going to talk about the changes made to our existing talent nodes, as well as cover all the new nodes that have been included and how they interact with one another. This video, as you are going to soon find out pretty quickly, is different from my usual style. This one's going to be more of a informal conversation, almost like I was talking to you over Discord about how I would receive these notes and my thoughts about it. This is new to me. It's very different from what I usually do, which is a scripted video where I get to lay out my thoughts, plan it all, and then edit it. But I thought that this was a good opportunity to try something different, something that I've been meaning to get better at doing. And this format would be also a lot more easier to apply when it comes to explaining how all the different talents work with one another, because I will be going back and forth between talents. So let me know in the comments what you think about this format. For those of you who like to listen to me ramble, I know there are a handful of you, you're in for a treat. But for the rest of you who are used to my more scripted videos, let me know. I do want to get better at doing this kind of videos because they are easier to produce, and I also want to get into the space of live streaming. So this is kind of like practice for that. Anyway, I'm really rambling. Let's get into the video. Let's start with Smite. Smite got a new modifier in this patch called Charged Strikes, where your heavy melee attacks electrocute enemies hit, damaging them. For those of you who are unaware of what electrocution does, it is a debuff that turns an enemy blue and then cause them to spark electricity, as well as deal a small amount of damage over time. On its own, electrocution really doesn't do anything much, but what it does do is interact with other blessings and talents, specifically in this case, Enfeeble. Enemies electrocuted by you take 10% increased base damage from all sources. Remember that this is a debuff, which means allies will also get the benefit of this 10% damage increase. The reason why Charge Strike is so good, I would say, as an addition to the Smite Blitz, is because previously, if you were using Smite and you wanted to apply this damage boost for your allies to take advantage of on, say, a boss or a monster, you would have to use Smite to do that. And so there would be cases where the Psyker is just smiting a boss, trying to apply the debuff on, and not really contributing much in terms of damage on its own, which is not great. This inclusion allows you to deal meaningful damage, say with your own Force Sword or a Dueling Sword, while still applying Enfeeble to the enemy. So now your overall team's damage output on tanky targets like a monster is significantly better, which I would say is a huge boost to the overall value that Smite brings to the table if you have this node. Next, we've got Malefic Momentum. Before I go into the details about what changed, what it previously only did was increase your warp attacks if you have made kills with a non-warp weapons before, so only the top part of it. The update to this is that it gave the reverse, where you now gain more damage to your non-warp attacks after you've killed things with warp damage. So in essence, this addition turned it into the warp-based version of Weapon Specialist from the Veteran, where Veteran wanted to swap between range and melee in their playstyle. This node incentivizes you to swap between warp and non-warp weapons. So for certain playstyles, like I would say Purgatus and Dueling Sword, this is a really good addition if you can swing it. Next, we have this whole layer down here, which has 7 new nodes included into it. I'm going to start from the right, starting with Soul Drinker. Soul Drinker states that killing an enemy with Soul Blaze restores 5% toughness and grants 5% critical hit chance for 5 seconds. Just for clarity's sake, when it says killing an enemy with Soul Blaze, it doesn't necessarily mean dying from the damage over time, but killing it with the debuff. So as long as they have 1 tick of Soul Blaze, this thing, Soul Drinker will activate. That's just a clarification for new players that are playing DARKTIDE for the first time. 5% toughness is okay, not bad. And when I saw this talent node, I immediately compared it to Soul Stealer, which is replenished 7.5% toughness on warp attack kill. This, in terms of regeneration, is a more niche version of this, simply because this only works on Soul Blaze. But if you're again playing on a build that is focused around the Purgatus staff, or I guess in this case the Inferno Force staff, yes, the Inferno Force staff, then this might offer you a bit more value if you happen to be coming down this part of the tree. The reason for that is because of the critical hit chance. For those of you who are unaware, for weapons that apply damage over time effects like the Zealot's Flamer and the Purgatus staff, I'm just going to keep calling it Purgatus because, old player, a critical chance means it applies 2 stacks instead of 1. This allows you to ramp up your weapon's damage over time significantly faster. Next, we have Warp Splitting, which just gives you 100% cleave based on your peril. This is an incredibly powerful talent on its own. It seems very simple, but the fact is, I think it's the only talent right now that actually gives cleave across all classes. And this cleave is not just for like melee, for example. It applies to range, it applies to your melee, and it applies to your blitz. Assail gets advantage, gets a benefit from increased cleave. So if you have ethereal shards, I think against something like Poxwalkers, you can hit 6 of them with a single shard, which is a massive boost to your crowd clearing capabilities. This also helps a lot in close quarters combat, because for example, you are trying to fight enemies off with your force staff and they are closing the gap. You can then switch to your melee weapon when you have a bunch of peril to help you fight better against the thicker hordes. Next, we have By Crack of Bone. Melee weak spot kills quells 5% peril and reduces further peril generation by 20%. This inherently benefits from, Quietude, because the peril quell essentially translates as toughness regenerated if you have this on, and in most builds you should almost always have Quietude on as long as you are playing with peril, because this is kind of interacts with a lot of the nodes that we have regardless of your build. But this works even better if you are using Scryer's Gaze as well, because of how shall I explain, the ebb and flow of peril, as I call it, where gaining peril restores your toughness if you have warp expenditure, and losing peril also restores your toughness. So this kind of helps you balance out with Scryer's Gaze, where you're constantly gaining peril and constantly losing peril, making you incredibly tough and very helpful for survivability. The last node here we have on the right side is Lightning Speed. It is a very simple node. It adds 10% melee attack speed, which I'm very happy about, because I was just thinking about this the other day. The other classes have an attack speed steroid. Ogryns have it on their Bull Rush, Zealot gets one for free. I think Veteran has it as well. I can't remember if it's on Weapon Specialist or it's one of the earlier nodes. I'll have to take a look at it later. And I kind of felt that it's kind of sad that Psykers have a sort of melee-centric build but did not have the ability to increase attack speed. So the inclusion of this is really leveling the playing field so that all classes get an attack speed steroid built in. This is just a general increase to your melee DPS, and it's never bad if you can get it, if you can pick it up. Now, moving over to the left side. Perilous Assault. Up to 50% weapon wield speed increases as your peril increases. I'm going to take a moment here to rant about this node a little bit. First off, 50% increased wield speed is not very helpful for Psykers, because the majority of Psyker weapons are already pretty fast. Like, there's really nothing here that takes a long time to kind of pull out and use, unlike, say, a bolter, for example. So that inclusion of that node is really very, very low value. The second problem I have with this is that it is on this side of the tree. This doesn't make any sense here, because if you wanted to make use of weapon wield speed, you would think that something like Malefic Momentum would be a more useful precursor to it, rather than being all the way here. If anything, I feel that Soul Drinker should be moved here, because this section of the tree is where all the Soul Blaze talent nodes are, so it makes sense that Soul Drinker should be here. I have no idea why Fat Shark decided to put this here. I don't know if it's for the memes or whether this was a lapse in decision making, but that is my rant about this particular talent node. And it also gatekeeps two really, really good talents for Psyker staff gameplay. The first of which is Channeled Force, plus 30% damage to Force Staff's primary attacks after fully charged Force Staff's secondary attack, last 5 seconds. So this opens up more playstyles, where previously, before this update, most everyone just focused on using the secondary attacks. This gives you the benefit of using your primary as a follow-up. So for example, if you trauma staff something and it's not dead yet, and if it's only one target, it's probably not worth trying to channel a second shot, because you're probably going to do more DPS by spamming your primary after using the secondary attack. So this node just incentivizes that a bit more and makes it even more powerful. Honestly, this node alone is very strong, but when you pair it with Empyric Shock, where you apply a debuff to an enemy to take 6% warp damage from your Force Staff's primary attacks up to 5 times for 30%, your Force Staff's primary attacks become incredibly powerful. Like, the DPS on it is insane. Incredibly good, incredibly strong. In fact, I'm in the middle of build crafting a build that exclusively takes advantage of the Force Staff's primary attacks. I'm still need to figure out some stuff in it, and also because something is broken on my side and I'm not quite sure. But there is a problem with Empyric Shock here, and let me just show you. I need to have this. Yeah. Empyric Shock does not work on Purgator Staff. You can see the Soul Blaze being applied, but not Empyric Shock. Now if I switch back to a regular staff, not regular staff, but staff that has the Void Bolt primary. Oh wait, I don't have it equipped. Get up, quick. I'll show you again with that equipped. There. You can see now Empyric Shock's being applied, which is correct. But if I swap to the Purgators again, let the debuff go away. Nothing. It just applies Soul Blaze, does not apply Empyric Shock. My guess is that the Purgator Staff's primary attack is still coded as a secondary, and that's why it's not applying Empyric Shock, which doesn't really make sense. I think either the tooltip's broken or something is off with it. No idea what's going on in the back end, but it's something that I thought was worth raising. Okay, now that this whole layer is done, let's move down a notch. Anything that changed here? No. Alright, Scrier's Gaze. So, here is where something is broken on my side, and I'm not quite sure what is or why it's doing this, but let me just read Scrier's Gaze first. Triggers Scrier's Gaze. When entering Scrier's Gaze, you gain 10% damage and 20% critical chance, and suppression to immunity. That's the new thing that's been included to help gun Psykers more. For every second in Scrier's Gaze, you gain 1% damage up to a maximum of 30%. This effect will then linger for 10 seconds after you reach Scrier's Gaze. While you are in Scrier's Gaze, you build up peril. This peril is temporarily slowed by enemy kills, and at 100% peril, it stops. So it makes a lot of sense, yes, when you read it. At 100% peril, it should stop. However many stacks of damage you've been building up, that will last for 10 seconds more after Scrier's Gaze stops. The problem, on my side, is that I don't think Scrier's Gaze stops. Now you can see I'm building up peril. I'm just going to speed it up by using up more warp, and you see I'm at 100. And if you can see, I'm going to highlight this when I'm editing. I'm still building up peril, and my peril is not going down. Scrier's Gaze is now perpetually in this state forever for me in the Psychonium. And on the surface, this is great because you basically have 100% peril, so anything that depends on peril, like warp splitting, is effectively permanently up. But you can't cast anything. The moment I cast anything at all, even with the next talent, which is Warp Unbound, I will explode. I have no idea why this is happening in the Psychonium, but it works normally in my games. So, cast, yep, I explode. And even if I explode, it goes back to 100% again. No idea what's going on. It only turns off if I engage with my talents, so I'm just gonna turn it off there. Reset everything. Voila. Now it's going back down, and the buff lingers and goes and ticks down as expected. Anyway, that's a weird thing. Let's talk about the new thing added, which is Warp Unbound. Scrier's Gaze now also prevents overloading from perils of the warp during its lingering effect. This is really, really nice for weapons that use any form of warp. So previously, there was always some risk if you're using, say, a Force Sword and you're using Scrier's Gaze, because at 100% peril, if you accidentally force pushed or force block, you would blow yourself up, which is not great. Warp Unbound allows you to play with peril-based weapons like staffs and Force Swords without fearing for your life, and also allows you to maximize the damage that you gain from Scrier's Gaze. So just having this node opens up Scrier's Gaze pairings with Force Staffs, which if you pair with Channel Force and Empyric Shock, it's going to be a crazy amount of damage that comes out. Also, a small thing, I don't know if people have noticed, but the change to the node path has also been updated here with this patch. Previously, you always had to pick one of these two to get, I think it was the toughest one here. Now, you are allowed to just pick up the toughest one for free without having to do this. Not that it makes much sense, because precognition is just really good on Scrier's Gaze, so you would not want to pick this up anyway, but I just like that they gave you more freedom when it came to building Scrier's Gaze. Okay, moving down to this node here, we have a bunch of new talents included in this one. Starting with, let's start with this. Tranquility Through Slaughter. Non-warp range critical hits quell 4% peril. Again, when you see something quell peril, remember the ebb and flow of peril, so it works with Quietude. In essence, if you get a crit on your range attacks, you quell peril and then you heal toughness without having to kill, so that's good. But there's also an interaction with crit-based weapons, so something like... where is it? Something like Headhunter, yes. Vigilant Autogun, I'm still calling it Rex Headhunter. The 3 burst one works very well with that node in particular, because whenever you get a crit, all 3 nodes crit, and in theory, that means this should proc 3 times, quelling 12% peril. I think it works this way. I haven't actually tested it out yet. But this is just really good for keeping your Scrier's Gaze timer longer, allowing you to stay below 100% peril for longer, and in general also acts as a form of range lifesteal for you. Moving down here, oh yes, we have Crystalline Will. Crystalline Will allows your overloading through perils of the warp to no longer knock you down, but you still take the appropriate corruption damage, which is basically you lose 1 bar worth of health to corruption. This is really good. This is really good for a number of reasons, but also worthless depending on your skill level. So if you were a new Psyker and you were learning how to manage your warp, which is a very key part of Psyker gameplay, then you would no doubt be using a lot of Venting Shriek, because you can use this when you're overloading to kind of save your ass by emergency venting all the peril you've accumulated. But if you were not used to managing your peril well, then this sort of became a crutch to your gameplay, and you would always kind of depend on Venting Shriek. Having this allows you to not have to take Venting Shriek and still play a lot more aggressively than you otherwise would. Since the punishment is just taking 1 wound's worth of damage, but not going down, which is usually what ends runs, you can kind of have a bit more forgiveness in learning how to manage your peril better. But if you are, say, like an Auric level Psyker, or you're really good with peril management already, then you probably won't blow up from mismanaging your peril, although it does happen sometimes. This just is kind of like training wheels for helping you manage your peril, and it's kind of like a safety net, just in case. It's a good addition. Won't necessarily see a lot of gameplay in the higher level, but it's nice that they added it because it allows newer players to learn, which I appreciate a lot. Something to note here on this tree, this path over here, this actually has changed a little bit. Previously, if you wanted to get Solidity, which is very good for 4-staff gameplay, you would always have to pick up Puppet Master. This used to be in front of this, so you had to use 1 extra point just to get here. But they've now changed it so that you can just pick this up freely without having to invest in Puppet Master, which has some uses on its own, but this was the more important node to get. So I like that they've made that improvement there. Moving down here, we have a bunch of new nodes added. The first one is Empyric Resolve. Minus 40% peril generation, but you have minus 30% toughness replenished. This node is incredible because it does something which I feel more nodes should do, which is lean very heavily into a certain kind of build or playstyle, rather than being an overall generalist. Because too many generalist builds makes the build crafting a bit dull, I would say. Minus 40% peril generation is incredible for staff gameplay and for blitz, in fact for playing Psyker in general that isn't a gun Psyker, because it allows you to improve your sustained damage output without having to quell a lot. And because you're likely going to pick this up, this helps even more with the peril efficiency. And if you pick up these 2 peril generation reduction nodes, I'm not sure if it's additive or multiplicative, but you just start your Psyker with minus 50% peril reduction, which is great. It's at least 44%, but it's as much as 50%. This improves something like the Trauma Staff's full cast by 3 or 4. You can now cast Trauma Staff probably 7 times, I think, if my math works correctly, 7 times or 8 times before having to quell, when previously you had at best 4. So this really helps a lot when it comes to just dealing out a whole bunch of damage. The drawback, that minus 30% toughness replenish, is actually very noticeable. I find in my Auric games, when I have this up, I'm a lot more fragile than I normally am, because the, again, ebb and flow of peril is weakened significantly. So your ability to regenerate peril, which is your form of regeneration, is also hampered by the fact that you are generating less peril to start with, which is good for offense, not very good for defense. And whatever toughness you do replenish is also weakened. So if you are someone who is still not used to not taking damage, or you are finding yourself being out of position and getting shot a lot, this will hurt you a lot, like a lot more. So use this with caution. If you are good with your positioning and you understand how the game works already in terms of combat, then this will just help you out a lot with your damage output. Next, we have Penetration of the Soul. Does 10% rending on warp attacks when above 75% peril. This node is at best unimpressive, I would say. 10% rending is okay at best. I know from a build crafting point of view and numbers point of view, 10% doesn't really add that much. But it's not so much the 10%, it's the condition that it is attached to that bothers me. Because first, it's only on warp attacks, which is very specific. Secondly, it's only above 75% peril. So you have two activation conditions just for 10% rending. Meanwhile, you have veterans that get flat 10% just for having the node. So already, Psykers, this node is on the back foot. I think to make this more appealing, more interesting of a pickup, I would make this 20% rending, for example, maybe 15% rending, but on all attacks, and it's scaled with peril like Warp Rider. At least the node would be more interesting in that way. Right now, there's almost no reason to ever pick this up. Moving on the further right, we have Surety of Arms. 25% reload speed while below 75% peril. On reload, generate up to 25% peril based on the percentage of clip restored. This is a very interesting node, simply because it is one of the handful of ways you can generate peril that doesn't involve using Scrier's Gaze, which means committing a ability to just generate peril, or using Force Staff of your Blitz. It's a third way that you can generate peril, which again interacts with things like Warp Rider, with Penetration of the Soul. So interesting, lots of use cases for this. I like using this with, for example, a Slug Shotgun, because the reload speed applies to the loading of the Slug Shell without actually generating any peril, because the one shell doesn't actually change the amount of bullets you have. So that's nice to know. The one more thing I will talk about that isn't technically in the notes is the restructuring of the Warp Siphon keystone. This restructuring is great. I love it a lot, because previously, if you wanted to get to this node, Warp Battery, where you can have 6 charges, you necessarily had to go through either one of this, then take out Empyrean Empowerment, and then either one of this just to get here. With this change, you save on 2 points to get to Warp Battery, which means if all you care about for Warp Siphon is just damage and the cooldown, you could just invest in Warp Siphon itself and then 2 nodes and you're done. There's no need for you to faff around with Inner Tranquility, Essence Harvest, Psychic Vampire, or Infire Reborn, which is good. I love it for the amount of flexibility we've gotten when it comes to Warp Siphon builds. That is about it. Those are all my thoughts about the new Psyker talent additions, as well as some of the changes made to existing nodes, and as you can see, some of the changes to the build path. Overall, I think I am quite happy, not quite happy, very happy with the changes that have been made to Psyker, the Psyker talent tree. I was just commenting to my Discord that day that I'm quite sad that Psyker build variation is very, very low, because yes, although Veterans tree is kind of a big mess, at least you have a lot of choice. Psyker's tree was very linear in a way. It's that you either go left, right, and you're kind of stuck with that, and you didn't really... Your builds were more or less the same, which made trying to do different builds difficult. Already you can see at the top here, I have four builds, 2 of which are basically updates to my previous ones. This is the Storm Mage update, and this is the Cinder Mage update. I'm still testing out these 2. I'll release these builds soon. If you enjoy this kind of live format where I'm just speaking as I go, explaining things as they are, without worrying too much about, you know, trim and polish, then I can release these videos very, very quickly, because the explanation for them will be very smooth without having to do too much editing. So yeah, that brings us to the end of this video. Let me just reiterate, I'm very pleased with the Psyker update. I think we've gotten so much more variety with this. I think they've opened up a lot more gameplay playstyles. Psyker build is much more dynamic with these changes as well, especially if you include the fact that Psykers have more weapons to play around with. So yeah, again, this video is very different from my previous videos. I know this video is going to be much longer. I can already see it. I can already see it in OBS that it's much longer than it normally is, but do let me know. If you don't like this kind of video, then I will abstain from doing it or try to get better in a different way. But if you like to hear me ramble or just hear my thoughts, then if you enjoyed this, also let me know in the comments. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next one. Varlets.